Hello and welcome. This is Separated by Force, afstandsmoeders in the Netherlands. My name is Sarah Tekath, and today we are going to meet Ina Hut. Ina Hut was for several years, from 2003 till 2009, the director of one of the biggest adoption agencies in the Netherlands, named Wereldkinderen. But the more Ina got involved with the system, the more she felt like she didn't want to be a part of it any longer. In 2009, she resigned publicly from her position at Wereldkinderen as a whistleblower after the Ministry of Justice told her to not continue her investigation of the background of the adoption of children from China. They told her if she didn't stop, the ministry would revoke the license of Wereldkinderen. This withdrawal has gotten a lot of media attention, and the Minister of Justice had to face responsibilities within the Tweede Kamer for the intimidation of Ina Hut for her attempt to investigate and fact-finding. For the purpose of that debate, she wrote a report for the Tweede Kamer of the Dutch Parliament about the system of intercountry adoptions, among others from China, and the reprehensible attitude of the ministry. In her view, the ministry let trade interests prevail over the interests of children. She is currently working at the Dutch Coördinatiecentrum against human trafficking, an organization that fights against human trafficking in the Netherlands. Ina Hut, welcome.
Dankjewel, Sarah.
In this podcast, we have learned that between 1956 and 1984, in the Netherlands, roughly 15,000 children were given up for adoption. How is the current situation in the Netherlands when it comes to adoption?
We can
see that currently in the Netherlands there are only very few cases of national adoptions, about 30 to 40 children per year. But there are still international adoptions, even though the numbers are decreasing. From 1956 till 2012, around 55,000 children were internationally adopted into the Netherlands from different countries such as China, India, Colombia, Thailand, the Philippines, and African countries. Luckily, in 2009, the number of international adoptions in Netherlands decreased significantly. Currently, about 200 up to 300 children are adopted annually into the Netherlands.
Are there adoption systems that are equally doubtful, even today?
If we look at the macro level of international adoptions from a helicopter perspective, I believe it is almost impossible to guarantee that adoptions are properly done. My motto has always been, when there is demand, there will be supply. Children will be relinquished, taken away and sold, because the adoption system exists. I don't mean to say that adoptions are generally bad, but looking at the macro levels of international adoptions, I feel that this system is no longer justifiable and it needs to be stopped immediately.
What was your motivation to work in the field of international adoption, and what did you expect it to be like?
I come from an entirely different professional field. I come from the position of the director of the Department of Executive Programs at the Nijrode Business University, and at that time my first child passed away during the birth. For me, this was the reason to make a career switch into the charity sector, which I had planned to do later in my professional life anyway. At that point, I had also signed for an adoption program. At that time, I also thought that adopting a child was something noble. I thought that it was great that there were people who were willing to help a child. In my mind, I had the idea that out there were so many children who have to grow up without their parents and who just need a loving family in the Western world. But when I got a chance to take a look behind the scenes, I noticed that the demand for children was a lot higher than the amount of the children that were available. In 2003, for every child, there were dozens of couples who were willing to adopt it. This demand of children created the supply. I noticed very quickly that this was not okay. And already 1 year later, I became the director of the organization World Children, at that time the largest adoption agency in the Netherlands. I stopped my own adoption program because I didn't want to be in any way involved in this demand for children. Back in those days, I hoped that I would be able to improve the system internally, and I have tried that for 6 years. But it turned out that it is an uphill battle. There are so many different parties and lobbies that want the system to continue that it was absolutely impossible to fight against it.
Dat het gewoon onmogelijk was om daartegen te vechten.
You have worked in the field of international adoptions yourself for multiple years as the director of the organization Wereldkinderen. Then you noticed things that made you doubt the entire system and you started to investigate. What happened afterwards?
I have noticed that the demand for children creates the supply, because the demand is higher than the amount of the children which are available. Our contacts in India, for example, refused to take part in the search for biological mothers. I assumed that they wanted to keep up the system. They claimed that they had promised the mothers to keep them anonymous, even though already 30 years had passed, and they could have asked whether the mothers had changed their minds in the meantime. In Ethiopia, I came across cases of judges who signed documents of children being orphans who actually still had parents, and everybody knew it. In Haiti, bribes needed to be paid in order to be able to continue our work there. For us, this was the reason to stop working there, because we didn't want to pay bribes. We also informed the Ministry of Justice about it, but they simply advised us to neatly write the bribes down in our books, so we wouldn't get into trouble. In other words, this means that other Dutch adoption agencies did indeed continue working in Haiti by paying bribes, with the knowledge of the Dutch Ministry of Justice. We have also found that on a large scale, directors of children's homes in China paid for children who were meant for international adoptions, many of them also to the Netherlands. And when I attempted to start my own investigation of this matter, I was told by the Ministry of Justice that they would revoke my organization's license if I continued. 3 times they threatened to me to do that.
When the afstandsmoeders were pressured to give up their babies, professionals seemed to believe that they had the best interests of the babies in mind. Is this way of thinking something that you also see with international adoptions?
Ja, dit zie je, maar je ziet ook vooral een ander fenomeen.
Yes, but also another pattern is clear to see, namely that international adoption raises a lot of money, especially for the countries where the children come from. This has turned into an industry with large amounts of money. In some countries, people may think that it is better for children to grow up abroad. This is the case in Ethiopia, for example. People think that the children are better off in a Western country. But still, I believe that money is the most important factor in the field of international adoptions. There are also children who have special needs due to a mental or physical disability. When it comes to these children, I wouldn't be able to tell if the same thing also counts for them, because these children often don't have a very bright future in their home countries. On the other hand, disabled children adopted into the Netherlands often end up in children's homes, far away from their culture, in an environment that they don't know. This is also far from ideal.
Afstandsmoeders were often advised to not talk about their situation with anybody. Is this pattern of keeping silent something that you have also come across with adoptions into the Netherlands?
Ja, je ziet dat in een groot aantal...
In many countries, pregnancy outside of a marriage is a big taboo. Often, unmarried mothers don't talk about their pregnancy, and then they get pressured to give up their babies. In some countries, it is also a taboo to talk about the fact that children were given up. The rule is, don't talk about your pregnancy, don't talk about giving up your child, and don't talk about adoption.
Niet over dat je een kind hebt afgestaan, praat niet over adoptie.
Do you think that the situation of international adoptions is comparable to the situation of afstandsmoeders in the past?
Ja, ik denk deels wel.
Yes, partly, because this is mainly about unmarried mothers, same as in the Netherlands, and the taboo of being pregnant without being married and the pressure which they have to face because of it. But in the context of international adoptions, it is also important to say that the demand in the West for children who can be adopted is really high. This stimulates corrupt local people to take away the children or to misinform the parents. Often the parents are told that it is about a scholarship and that their child will study abroad and will return at some point, which never happens. Many African countries, for example, are not even familiar with the concept of international adoption. In their culture, if a child loses its parents, another family member will take care of it. International adoption is a system which was invented in the West, and maybe originally it was meant to help children, but in the meantime it has become a system which provides childless couples with a child. And this is how the demand is created. But this cannot be the base of an adaptation system.
En dat kan niet de bedoeling zijn van interlandelijke adoptie. En dat stimuleert het aanbod van adoptie.
We have learned in a previous episode that the system of the afstandsmoeders traumatized the mothers and the children. Is this also the case with international adoptions?
Ja, je ziet dat zowel de afstandsmoeders...
We see that the biological mothers are often searching for their children for their entire life. And the adoptees, they are searching for their roots. The adoptees suffer from a trauma from being given away, and there is an additional trauma caused by the adoption in a Western country with a foreign culture. This, of course, causes problems. There are, of course, also adoptees who are very happy with their adoption and their adoptive parents. But now also the stories of biological parents who have been searching for their children all their life keep coming up. And they just want to know how their child is doing. They often have to live with this secret, because they are not allowed to talk about this with their families, because it would be a huge risk for them. So I can see really well that afstandmoeders and afstandkinderen are traumatized.
Als ouders, als ook geadopteerden, dat die getraumatiseerd zijn.
Do you know if the women whose children are now giving up for international adoption are equally pressured, just like the afstandsmoeders?
Ja, ik denk dat je geen illusies moet hebben dat...
Yes, we should give up an illusion that this is not happening in certain countries anymore. It is still happening. Because of the taboo of being pregnant without marriage in a certain society, and because of the social pressure which comes with this stigma to give up your child, as well as the pressure within children's homes.
De tehuizen waar je dan vaak verblijft om kinderen toch maar af te staan voor adoptie.
A new aspect in this system, which has not been the case with the afstandsmoeders, is corruption. Who is these days benefiting financially from mothers giving up their children?
Ja, ik denk dat je vooral kunt zeggen dat...
I think we can mostly say that local contact people, directors and staff of children's homes, as well as judges, benefit from this system. We have come across a case in China in which adoptive parents had to pay $3,000 to the local authorities, and nobody knows what happened to this money. But I highly doubt that it was used for the benefit of the children's home.
Het management van een kinderthuis in China.
It took 30 years until the system of the afstandsmoeders finally stopped. How long is the system of international adoptions already going on? And what can we do to stop it?
Ja, de adoptiewetgeving is in 1956 ontstaan.
In the Netherlands, the adoption law came up in 1956, but we can see that adoptions from so-called third world countries mostly came up in 1970s. The system is now going on for 50 years, and in this time, 55,000 children have been brought to the Netherlands. The peak was at 1,200 children per year. Now it has luckily decreased to around 200 per year, which is a great development, but I would like to see this system be gone for good, because a closer look at the macro levels only shows that it isn't right, as there is a lot of money involved and there is plenty of corruption and abuse. I think we need to focus more on local protection system in the countries of origin of the children. In case they don't have parents, we need to support their extended families, so they would be able to take care of the children. We need to build local structures and care systems instead of dragging them to the other side of the world. It is much better for children if they can stay in their known environment, in their own culture and within their families, because international adoption definitely breaks all family bonds, which is harmful for the children. It is wrong to destroy these bonds. There needs to always be an option for these children to get in touch with their families, no matter where they are.
Kunnen blijven houden met je familie, waar die familie zich dan ook bevindt.
Ina Hut, dankjewel.
Graag gedaan.
Thanks for listening. This was Separated by Force, Afstandsmoeders in the Netherlands. If you like this podcast, please feel free to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcast. If you want to support our cause, please share this podcast in your social media to reach the utmost attention for the injustice that has been done to afstandsmoeders and their children in the Netherlands and all over the world. Thank you very much and have a great day.